Hello everyone, and welcome to this brand new episode of the GRC Engineering Podcast Season 2. This is the first time I'm doing this. This is the kind of premiere episode of the experts panel. So in this setup, we'll have a couple of practitioners working in a specific kind of subset of GRC and having their take on some of the hot topics everyone's debating on LinkedIn and probably on some private Slack groups I don't know about. And the goal here is to kind of have their takes on some of the big questions, how they're trying to tackle it in their current organization and also overall with their breadth of experience. And the goal for us is to learn more about how we can do better and also potentially, have new ideas we can implement. So yeah, I want this to be practical, but also kind of give also some futuristic understanding of like where things are going and how as practitioners they see their field evolving. So for this first one, of course, TPRM, the topic that everyone loves to hate, that everyone thinks is the cornerstone of everything, SOC 2 has an issue, yeah, but TPRM accepting, blah, blah, blah. So everyone is kind of just saying TPRM's fault for everything. So I want to speak to practitioners that, breathe in, day out, TPRM, discuss with them how they approach it, how they think about some of the challenges the industry is raising, and how they do their best. I think it's a very tough job. You have to review hundreds of vendors. You're under, a lot of resource constraint, but you're probably the key cornerstone of, I would say, a lot of the supply chain security. So that's also something that everyone needs to understand. It's not that easy. So I'll present everyone very quickly, and if you want to add something about your experience and why you love TPRM, interesting first question. Feel free to add. So I'll start with McKenna. She's currently working in the TPRM field at Netflix. And she also has experience in security, more enterprise security at Plaid, Samsara, and I think also worked at Splunk. So welcome, Kristi. So Kristi, she's also a TPRM Pro. She's starting soon a new role, and she also is worked at Okta before, and she has a lot of experience in TPRM. Welcome. Thanks for accepting to meet with us. And Blake currently working in the TPRM team at Airbnb, and also has very varied GRC experience. You worked at Instacart, you also worked at Salesforce, and you also work in consulting, I think, productivity, right? So same, super happy to have you with us. So anyone wants to add anything about, any additional accolades I forgot about? All good?
Thank you. I love TPRM because it's very broad and lots of variety in your day-to-day. It's very exciting work.
Very cool. Perfect. So I think we'll get started. So I have a couple of questions. Okay, some spicy questions, some not too spicy questions. So the first one, of course, I had to speak about questionnaires, right? I think if we don't speak about questionnaires, everyone will be super disappointed. So of course, I think the history of TPRM. I think security is a part of assessing the supply chain, but it's not the only thing you do. You probably do assess your supply chain for other risks, potentially depending on what they do for you. And it's been a field that is like a couple decades old already, especially if you think about physical supply chain and logistics, etc. So questionnaire has been in and on for a long time. We have like security questionnaires. Of course, everyone knows the SIG, the cake, and then the 1,000 kind of custom versions that the vendors have. What I wanted to know is like, is there anything you've done in terms of optimizing the process? So if you rely on it, and if you had to rely on it, depending on the impact you have on your program, like what did you do to make it more efficient, maybe more custom to the vendor you're trying to onboard? Some of the, kind of interesting approaches you've taken around sending questionnaires. Who wants to start?
I'll kick it off. I guess I'm off mute. So some of the areas we kind of focus on is not taking a single approach, right? Not just sending a 200, 400, 600 questionnaire to every third party, because that's not going to scale well. So we do take a risk-based approach. So we tailor, I'm sure a lot of the stuff I'm going to say here is not revolutionary, groundbreaking. So we do tier our third parties based on the risk. So inherent risk questionnaire, what type of data they can have access to. Is it going to be personal data? Is it business confidential? If so, who are the data subjects? Where do they, geographically live from like a data privacy concerns? Are there going to be any integrations with, any of our production environments or corporate applications? And so once we kind of do that initial intake triaging, so to speak, we'll send out a questionnaire tailored to that risk level. So some of them, if it's a lower risk, we'll streamline that, very, very low level of friction that we'll exert on that relationship to get it through. And then kind of conversely with that, with the high risk relationships, right? We'll typically standardize the process. We'll leverage a SIG or a cake, something that most people are familiar. And if they do have like a GRC or, customer trust team, that's something typically they invest resources and time to prepare something, right? So if they have it, we'll accept it. We're not gonna, say we're special. Hey, it's not in the right format. We want something different. We're not here to bust your chops. Like we can get it, ingest it, and do our due diligence on that. And additionally, getting the SOC 2 or, penetration testing, if they want to share summary of policies, whatever they feel comfortable with, we'll do our due diligence on that at that level. Again, it's one of those things, like if the shoe's on the other foot, like we don't want to be fielding these type of questions. We don't want to be doing the checkbox compliance, right? We want to be able to answer or ask meaningful questions and get good answers that we can actually do and make informed decisions about the risk posture and how we're going to use the third party. So that's kind of how I've seen it and how we've operated before. But yeah, curious, McKenna and Kristi, your thoughts on it.
Sure. I think at a baseline level, creating those templates for the questionnaire is, a necessary activity and something that you can do that's effective, that I've participated in is automating, a subset of those questions that is super important. So flagging those responses if they are non-compliant or if they don't exist, if there's no response, that gives you a quick indication of, there might be something to quickly hop on a call or email the vendor about, as well as, looking at the general responsiveness. If you have a custom questionnaire, is it, being responded to, or is it acknowledged initially? That gives you a quick, look to see what is this vendor relationship like, from a first glance. But as far as reducing the vendor fatigue, it's definitely a problem. I would say that this industry is, and on a positive note, I think there's so much work and effort being created and built and developed to reduce that fatigue. So I think something that TPRM teams do to successfully embrace that is to stay current with vendor software and what your current vendor software might be adding and enhancing for those modules. I think that's key. So having someone on the internal team that's kind of staying abreast of those changes and updates to that software and what could be automated, working with those vendors, proactively to do quarterly reviews, see what's on their roadmap, see what you can maybe grab low-hanging fruit wise for those questionnaires that you want to add. But for sure, you don't want to send an exhaustive, overly tedious subset of questions to a vendor that's not really doing much with your sensitive data, for sure.
Yeah. So very similar to what Blake and Kristi have already said is, kind of how we do things here at Netflix. However, Netflix has a very unique culture of freedom and responsibility and context over control. We're super fast paced. It's a decentralized environment. So that puts very distinct pressure on how we do vendor security and manage third-party risk. So we don't do like blanket questionnaires. It's not our default. Instead, we leverage a tiered intake process that narrows the scope based on specific risk indicators, like data sensitivity, integration types, access levels. And then for, like low risk vendors, we often, reference like pre-vetted trust centers or public disclosures. Sometimes we'll look at their security documentation just to see if we see general gaps, but we typically don't do really intensive reviews over these questionnaires or any kind of information that they give us. For high risk engagements, though, we do use like a structured modular control checklist that's tied to our internal baseline requirements. And that helps us focus questions on, what's actually relevant to that vendor. And that really helps us to reduce the noise and the fatigue on both the vendor side and our side. So we try to structure everything to be fast paced and get us all through the part no one wants to have to really deal with long term. So yeah, that's how we do things.
Very cool. That's cool. Everyone kind of explain a little bit about like vendor tiering and like, the input you use to make sure, you put them in the right bucket, and depending on the criticality, they have a different type of assessment, like potentially less thorough if they're less risky. I wanted to get your take about something related. Is like you all spoke about some of the tools we're using, so PII handling, level of access to your internal environment, like is it actually like processing customer data, etc. Do you also have an input around like, all companies, they have quirks in the way they were built sometimes. So you have internal weaknesses that you can't really kind of work around because that type of legacy is like kind of business critical. Do you also leverage like potentially the top 5 risk or the top risk of your organization as a way to say like on that specific topic, like you really need to be good, because once an attacker gets in through you, like we're completely screwed, because on that part, like, I don't know, we use an Oracle database from like 25 years ago, and now it's become like everything is wrapped around it, but we can't really get to the core and like re-architect it from the ground up. Is this something also you think about when you can assess vendor risks tiers?
Yeah, I'll jump in there and say, I think that's one of the key aspects of how TPRM adds value, is knowing not just on a static, basics, the risk appetite of your organization, as well as remediation roadmaps for enterprise security initiatives across the organization internally, but having a pulse and a constant cross-functional partnership and conversation and monitoring arm and function along the way each quarter, each fiscal year, to know what are the objectives, what are we, deprovisioning, what are we trying to tackle internally, and TPRM knows that risk appetite, hopefully, and then all of that assessment work and identified issues can feed into ideally, a uniform or at least a moderately mature function and dialogue that is ongoing. So I think you bring up a really good point about how TPRM should be adding value, because we become ideally trusted partners to all of the critical stakeholders that are making those decisions, and we might be able to help dial up or lever down the speed of a certain team's initiative or remediation project, or even an innovation project as well. So I love that. I think that's something that I think I would like to know Blake and McKenna's perspective. I think that it kind of brings pride to the role, because that you're adding value in that way. Yeah, curious to know your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think, as you said, like it's important from the third party security practitioner not to just look specifically at the third party, right? It's being able to internally reflect on like what are our top risk levels, working with our enterprise risk teams and the application and business owners. This kind of falls in a little bit of like the shared responsibility model, right? Like we were able to look at the posture of the third party, but then when it comes to the implementation and operationalizing it, for example, if you're looking at a SOC report, the CUECs, for example, like, okay, how can we make this a stronger connection with a third party, whether it's managing access and identity on our side, or it does making sure you're enabling MFA and SSO and all these things to strengthen your environment and reduce the likelihood and risk level of a potential issue as well. So.
Absolutely. +1 to everything that's been said. The unique part of how we do things and look at third-party risk here at Netflix is we look at it more than just the vendor's posture, but their product posture and how it integrates across the ecosystems that we have, but also what is like the life cycle visibility. How do we reduce risk at every point within the life cycle of that vendor and their product in our ecosystem? And so really our focus is more on building systems and guidance that help make that secure. We try to embed continuous assurance in different ways that are tied not just to like onboarding, but like through the different usage changes, integrations, and vendor growth over time. And we attach that very closely to what are the risks that we care about. So we work closely with other teams, like our application infrastructure security teams and our pen testing teams and our cloud infrastructure teams to ensure that these risks are not only being assessed at the very beginning, at the pre-contract time, but post-contract. And then how do we validate that? How do we build assurance around like we are looking at those risks at every touch point, at every life cycle of that vendor and their product. So yeah, we do take that into consideration past just that initial questionnaire stage.
And as well as helping inform legal, or working with legal, because those contract negotiations are ongoing, and we can really be, and our assessment work can provide a timely output that can inform legal about how they might want to modify that negotiation or some of those terms.
Yeah, that's very important. I think people underestimate like contractual negotiations. And I work in customer trust, so I've been on the other side as well. I think you need someone good on both sides, and I think TPRM can be a great ally because you have, as you all explained very well, like you have your whole business context, security context, and you have something that can really bring to the table when you review like security addendum and all those different clauses, with some stuff attached. And you want to probably as TPRM team add some customer audit rights if you can, right? So that's fair game. And I really think that having a strong relationship with commercial legal and the team that handle this is very, very important. And you can really bring like tangible benefits to the business that way, and meaningfully reduce the risk posture. So that's very cool. Okay, so that's my second question. We spoke about relationship with legal and the other teams is related to it. So procurement lifecycle, lots of teams are involved. You're a key part, especially the bigger the vendor is and the more footprint you will have in your own org. I think now we have hundreds of SaaS tools, as much of in many of our companies, just because every team has a new tool they can use, and they go through the procurement lifecycle and they want quick time to value, right? So I think there is additional pressure in terms of like making the assessments faster, while potentially making them more thorough at the same time. But there's the thing about speed, and I would say like in your context, like do you see this? Do you see this acceleration in terms of how fast you need to churn out the reviews, and also at the same time the demands for potentially coming from other stakeholders to be like more thorough, more detailed, and we need actually like more data, but we need it faster as well. And how do you balance that as a practitioner? And do you actually feel like this acceleration is happening in your experience?
I can definitely speak to that because, again, I'm going to say at Netflix, things move super, super fast. And because we are decentralized, security is something that has to be bought into, right? Our users are trusted with the freedom and responsibility to move forward without engagement from us. And so part of that process is getting them to buy into the assurance that we provide them. So it is non-negotiable to be able to be fast, scale fast, provide value quickly, guidance and insight. So we really end up being more like security consultants to help them through that entire process. So to do that, we've created cut lines, safe patterns, thresholds that we expect to see. So if you come in as we're looking at the general, use of that vendor, how we plan to use them, how we plan to integrate them, onboarding, all that process, right? If you're under a certain threshold, it's bless you, move forward. You don't need a full review. So we have pay paths for our low risk vendors. When we have stakeholders that push back, instead of us trying to block, we try to give them visibility into those trade-offs, right? So things like, here's the kind of data that you're exposing, here's the blast radius if misconfigured, and here's what's worked well in the past. We really want to make it easy to do the right thing in the most secure way without slowing down the work. And I think that's not just something that we have to do, it's expected in the culture at Netflix.
That's so very well stated. I echo that. I think one asset that you can socialize is the data classification and handling standard or policy for your organization. The more teams that know that, they're aware of it, they know why it's there, they know how applications and data, data sharing and purchases of new third-party tools would need to be run through that and through that lens. It should be easy to discuss, easy to understand, easy to reference. So that's when our team can really work with the governance teams and the compliance teams very closely to socialize that. I think that's, one aspect, as well as, a simple visualization of data flows. However, you can provide those visual tools to internal teams to make those decisions, to show, here's all of the flows that this third party system is taking in or processing with this hypothetical scenario or with this expanded scenario of using an existing vendor, for example. A lot of times I think that's maybe an understood or under-socialized aspect of the TPRM role, is a lot of times the TPRM function is vetting and reviewing existing tools and tying in other third-party apps and integrating those in a way that could drastically increase the blast radius and the risk portrait. So looking at that as well as helping these requests and the stakeholders associated with those requests understand that it's not just TPRM that may be interested and need to review what's happening. It's also, an AI governance team or a council or privacy legal, and that both of these assessments may be happening in tandem. And so efficiencies that you can create between those teams can reduce what I would call the business stakeholder fatigue, because that's certainly a problem as well. So accelerating the onboarding often comes when you successfully decrease the business stakeholder fatigue as well, because when they've learned, you have a couple businesses and their mid to upper management stakeholders are rinse and repeating this process, and it's very well known with them, then it just gets better. And obviously the elephant in the room is turnover, right? You have someone in a control owner relationship or a business stakeholder that may have worked with your team for a couple cycles, but they're no longer there. So whatever you can do to socialize the process in an evergreen way, I think it helps when new people come in as well.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, like I really agree with what has been said, but also the paved path. So as McKenna pointed out, like building the infrastructure to get the employees to do the right thing and provide the most due diligence and oversight. So for example, I'm sure you guys all run into this, right? It's like a proof of concept or proof of value, right? If people are like, oh, I want to test out this tool, but I don't want to go through 3 months of review, right? Like it's going to be taking too long, or we're trying to test out, do a baseline against 4 different third parties. This is going to take forever to do it. So making sure that there's a paved path for a specific, like a POC. So, hey, what are the requirements to do that in a secure way of, hey, don't connect to our, any of our infrastructure or production, like use synthetic data, making sure we do some initial due diligence on it, but just let's make sure to keep it very, very lightweight in terms of how it's going to be used so that people have a paid path, because otherwise the alternative is, oh, you can't do that and it's going to be 3 months, and people do decide to go off the paid path, take shortcuts, and then back to what you said, the blast radius expands. So really making sure that you provide the guidance across what those are, and like the minimal, I guess, minimal security or viable product, so to speak, of due diligence is what we've found is great. And then just to add to it as well, as since we're all risk professionals, we need to be able to articulate the reason why we're balancing, due diligence as well as speed. So being able to actually articulate risk, not just like some corporate buzzword risk statement to someone that they're like, what does this mean? What am I supposed to do with this? It's, oh, let's go look at some of the news articles, right? There's a new security incident, a breach, pretty much, almost ongoing at this point. So, hey, if we take a shortcut, these could be this could be the damage that is done reputationally to our company. And if there is a shortcut that needs to be taken, getting it up to an executive leadership level to actually, one, you need to educate them what the risks are before they can approve it or accept it. But getting someone really high up that's actually like, wow, this is a pretty high risk situation. Do we feel good about this? Because, that can't sit with us to accept it. And that's what we found is helpful, right? Just educate them, speak a common language, and get them to really truly understand the risk before they say, yep, let's push it to broad.
I like that. That's I really like all your answers, especially focus on like kind of efficiencies, paper path, as you said. And what's interesting, especially about Netflix situation, is interesting. You almost need like to convince stakeholders to leverage you in a way, which I think is both, is more challenging, but also potentially more rewarding, just because there's like, you need impact without formal authority, right? Like I own this gate in the process, and you have to go through me no matter what. That's interesting, but I think you learning skills that are probably when you go back to another company where, hey, you have no choice, you have to go through TPRM. I think those skills are probably very important, because I'm thinking in other verticals and in compliance and others, I think you often can use the might of regulators, etc., to get your way, even though the kind of the approach you took was probably not the best and might actually kind of antagonize the control owners for later points. So I think flexing those skills, kind of finding the way so it's win-win for them, I think is very, very interesting indeed. That was really cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I have loved most about working at Netflix is, again, I come from a security engineering background, and I'm used to being able to be a band hammer. And so it's really challenged me, and how do I navigate, and get stakeholder alignment through quiet influence. How do you influence without authority? And so we have to come up with very creative ways, very unique ways to focus on the employee experience and show the reasons why they want to come to us, that you're not coming to us because you need to, but because you need that extra assurance in your head that you're doing the right thing, the risk that you're accepting as well is right size, and that you are driving value for the business. So, one of the unique things that we've been doing is, we're a very small team. We can't always be everywhere. We don't have the time to always align with the thousands of employees that we have. So, guidance is that key. Those paid paths are key. And so we're working on building out a guidance delivery system that provides just-in-time guidance to employees to self-service if their engagements are low risk. And that's really, it's been interesting and fun to see, how do we identify those risk signals early? How do we know when to engage them at the right time, and what guidance do we deliver to them, when they need it? And then if we're getting people coming to us and saying, I have a high risk engagement, I've already self-service using the guidance that was provided to me, and here's the exact things that you need to, speed through this engagement. I mean, that's a win for us, and that's a win for them. And it's something that's been really interesting and cool. I might not have done that at any other company that didn't have this unique culture. that I'm experiencing. So yeah, it's been very interesting.
Very cool. So the next question, so we spoke a little bit about kind of the operations, right? How to make things faster, more efficient. You spoke about all of you about self-serve as well, and kind of having ways through which stakeholders can pick themselves what they need, understand like the requirements. So a big part of kind of external assurance and how you assess your vendors is relying on third-party attestation. Sorry, so it's like a big part. So external auditors assess the security controls of X company, and you would leverage that as part of your assessment to kind of trust that third-party authority, the auditor, to understand the baseline of security controls they have implemented. What I want to, I'll kind of blend two questions. There is lots of talks about declining value of external certifications and attestations. Okay, sorry for SOC 2. SOC 2 is not a certification. But there has been discussions around the declining value of third-party attestations in terms of people are getting them faster, quicker, kind of, heard SOC 2 in a box from some people as well. From your perspective, I want to understand kind of two main things. Do you think if we had a way for every kind of type of evidence you would require from a vendor, do you think the weight of third-party attestation has been lower and you kind of give more weight to something else that you would require? And also, do you think overall, when you review kind of those third-party attestations, do you see overall declining quality for the ones you've been reviewing and you've been checking?
Yeah, I think overall, so our approach and approach I've taken in the past is if a third party does have those documents like a SOC 2 or pen test, so external audit reports, we'll request those. We'll take a look. Typically, I check to see who the assessor is. So if I see that it's some name I've never heard of, and I have to do some Google searching to find out, I definitely am going to start losing a little bit more credibility. Not to say that they couldn't be some really, experienced, seasoned people in this field that are, just started up their own consulting firm and are doing this. But I then will go through the report and, again, look at the scoping, look at their trust service criteria, look at the details, like what are they capturing within that report? If it seems pretty vague and kind of fluffy, definitely going to most likely do a call with the third party. It's again good to do a chat with someone on their side. So if they do have a customer trust team, it's good to know, hey, there is someone on that side. They're educated. They can actually articulate their security posture, their privacy posture, their compliance posture, not a tech support line that you're submitting a ticket to and it goes into the abyss, right? So if they're able to talk the talk, that definitely helps. But again, I think having some credibility, not to say like the big four or some of the ones we're all typically aware of, but seeing some of those, I'm definitely going to have a little bit higher confidence level in them. I'll start doing some due diligence on that before I again fire out a 200 question or whatever. I try to take information from that because again, I think as Kristi mentioned earlier, if they do have GRC teams that are investing into their controls and their testing, and they are bringing reliable, credible auditors out here, it is good to rely on that. If we want to go a step further, for example, hey, there's testing in your SOC 2 around incident response. Well, incident response is probably one of the most critical aspects of managing a breach. Can you give us a little bit more information? Like, do you have a redacted playbook you'd be willing to share, or can you actually talk us through, or show us like maybe the latest tabletop you've done over a call or a Zoom call? That would give me a higher level of confidence that what they're testing is actually more based on reality, not just trying to hit their sales quota by having this flashy certification. So,
and I would say also, AI infused into the core of a lot of these tech platforms and services is prevalent, is an understatement. Often the SOC 2 report has not caught up with the inclusion of what might need to be applied to incorporate those innovative changes. And so a lot of times I will ask, what is the roadmap for evaluating those controls now that they've perhaps transformed their core business or at least enhanced it with that technology. So I agree. I think that they can be relied on, and it's kind of a trust but verify approach. I don't think that they are going anywhere. I don't think that these attestations are losing their validity, but I think that we're using them in different ways. You talked about, Ayoub, the weight, of these assets, and I think that the weight of security monitoring tooling to have a continuous monitoring of third parties is catching up with the weight of documentation. So it's almost like you're finding the delta, and a lot of other aspects of your business may not understand how much work goes into TPRM ensuring coverage and kind of looking for those deltas. And is what we're seeing in this report close to what we're expecting to configure and monitor with these tools? And so I think that discovery work is core. It's essential to the due diligence that TPRM does.
I was gonna say plus 1,000 to everything that's already been said. I think we have definitely seen the trend of, SOC 2s or any kind of attestation being, somewhat vague descriptions and boilerplate language. And so, we've always taken the perspective that we will look at these against our own internal control expectations and validate them with additional evidence, whether it's pen test summaries or architecture diagrams, integration permissions, test environment behavior if possible, even brief demo walkthroughs of products. Our goal is to essentially say, if you want us to trust your controls, show us how they work, especially if it's in a product perspective. But we're looking for other ways. It's very much like Kristi said, the trust but verify. So we're going to find other ways to build assurance. Those SOC 2s, for example, are starting points. They're not endpoints for us.
Okay, very, very interesting. So I'm getting, it's still relevant, but it's part of a kind of bigger assessment. You can't just say like you have a SOC 2 and that's enough to pass. It's kind of, use a set of criteria. It's part of it, but it's not the end all be all. So that's definitely interesting to hear. So of course, companies, they'll get through certification cycle to potentially help with going through the vendor review process. Another thing they might do is build a trust center. So trust center have been kind of catching up. Of course, we know some of the big vendors, and it's been also a way for kind of enterprise companies to build their customer trust program and team as well, like actual dedicated staff that work with TPRM teams. In terms of, so for me, there's this thing where TPRM, like you want process adherence from your vendors, which means you want to have like some kind of typical ways through which you work, but trust center, they can vary. The level of depth you get from them can vary. Of course, you can pick and choose whatever you also display on them. So I see also as something that is potentially a disruption to the TPRM teams, just because there's a lot of additional work on your end to sift through the content, etc. So from your perspective, do you think overall, when you assess a vendor, so I already picked from some of you that it's potentially a good signal to see a trust center, but do you think it's a net time saver for you and it's a net assurance gain, or do you think it's part of the tools, but if you have questions, most likely the actual questions you care about, they won't be on the trust center and you still have to reach out and do those steps?
I will say as a quick answer that this is such an interesting time to be in this industry because of the rapid adoption of trust centers and in tandem, the rapid development of TPRM automation software. So I think even a year from now, you might see tooling in which it can, quickly grab trust center content and intelligently give you a first pass at what it is assuming about what those gaps may be or whatever, based on the the way that you've configured that software on your end to be looking for certain things or the presence of certain things or anomalies. I do think they are a great marketing tool, not only for customers and potential customers, but for security awareness internally. When you can speak to, this is what we care about, it's also a security and awareness training tool for your employees. So I think that overall it does offer a net positive for speed and efficiency for the front end of assessments. You also have the back end. McKenna spoke about the life cycle. So when you identify issues through a TPRM assessment, what do you do with that, and how does the trust center come into play later? Is your team subscribing to updates? If so, what does that look like? What do you take action on when you get more information? So they can be great on the front end. They can also produce even more data to manage and a challenge, I think, on the back end of an assessment as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think trust centers, I think they're helpful, but only if they're, they're like curated and well maintained. If a trust center is just a document dump, it's just noise. So, obviously we're looking for alignment with our assurance needs, like our document scope clearly, is there a change log or version history? Do the vendors even proactively like highlight changes or controls or known gaps? Like, are they willing to share what's not included as well and communicate that up front? So I think when done well, trust centers can help reduce that back and forth and accelerate low friction reviews for us. But, when they're done poorly, it's just more homework for us. So yeah, I like them, but, there's caveat. It's still always going to be a trust but verify.
Yeah, I think just to quickly add on that, I think from a TPRM practitioner standpoint, I like the efficiency that if I do want to go get a SOC 2 or pen test, I can typically go to get it quickly, which is really nice. So I don't have to wait on, hey, business requester, go get this. I have to wait 5 days, 6 days to someone get to it. So I really like I can get things more efficiently. I come from my previous role as you maybe know from Instacart. So I did build the customer trust program there. So I feel like from that standpoint, there's definitely benefits from, hey, these are the questions we are getting from our third party, from not vendors, from customers asking about our program. We can take that information back internally to either enhance our controls, or when we're doing our control testing, that feedback gets wrapped back into our own control testing, as well as what are people caring about, right? If I am investing significant time and resources, like, hey, I need a SIG, I need a cake, I need a BSA core, I need this white paper, and your customers aren't downloading or accessing that, okay, maybe it's not providing the value you need, and that's something that you can reallocate that time back to something else, or put more time into a more thorough SOC 2 report, or more control testing, or doing stuff like that. So I think there's definitely efficiencies. One concern I do have though is from like a tool fatigue as a practitioner. Again, there's not like a standardized exchange, or like I haven't seen like the latest and greatest, like this is the best exchange yet, where I can go and I want to go look at this third party, I want to go look at this and download and get the stuff quickly. So I do have to go to the safe bases, the Dradas, the whatever. So that becomes a little bit just adds a little bit more bandwidth and overhead to go search and find that information.
Yeah, that's something I'm seeing as well. I think it's that middle layer that at some point we'll need to make sure on your end you leverage all of the information that your vendor has been kind of gracefully giving out, but then you don't have yourself to actually dig deep. You can get all the information and consume it where your single source of truth lies, which makes it more scalable on both ends. But yeah, and especially on that point, like the next question I had for you is, I do see like a lot of automation around the TPRM space, especially like leveraging AI, which is very good at like, kind of processing unstructured data, which a lot of that content can be. There is an industry that has been here for quite some time, the kind of security scoring industry. And I think they market themselves a ton as like software supply chain security, and kind of helping understand the security posture of your vendor using so many like different data points, and then they kind of give you a score and they kind of explain how they get to that score. So first, do you leverage it as part of your role? Is this something that you also get into the mix of all the different data points you use to assess? If yes, like what's the value you get from them? And if not, like the reasons why, like what do you think some of the limitations of these tools can be?
So I can go. We don't really leverage security scoring platforms all that much. I think they're good for being directional signals, especially when we use them to spot, like anomalies or like a sudden drop in the score. That can be an indicator of compromise. I think it's useful for that, but we don't treat them as authoritative at all. A high score doesn't mean that you're secure, and a low score certainly doesn't mean that there's no risk. So I think in how we have used them, and we've used them very, very lightly, they're more of a part of a broader risk signal for us versus a gating mechanism. They're not the end all be all. Again, the way that we do things, we have an internalized baseline that we always assess everything against, that are built around our own personal risk understandings. And again, we use a lot of different things to be signals for us to help us really understand what we're looking at, and then how we're going to tailor our engagements to the specific risks that we see. So again, just, we like to use everything as risk signals at the end of the day.
Yeah, I feel the same. 100% echo that. It's good to monitor. My feedback with that though is some of those tools do become, again, when we think of resources and budgets for our teams, right? Some of those tools I think get a little cost prohibitive, so to speak. So they do get a little expensive if we're like, hey, we have this other, third-party tool that we're doing monitoring here or sending out questionnaires here. So if we're all have to be conscientious of our budgets, some of those tools do get a little bit expensive, where you can't actually monitor. You're not going to be able to monitor your whole population, right? So that's there's some limitations there, but like you said, it's a good signal just to keep an eye on.
And I think one of the reasons I'm interested in, your content, Ayoub, and your podcast, your blog is, you promote the need on an ongoing basis about knowledge graph and uniformity of a common language. And that can provide the framework for being able to engineer ingestion and continuous monitoring of data sets. And so I do think that I see that in our future. We have to be able to do that exercise, though that could take a year or 2 years, right? And so maybe there's some new roles created for cross-functional monitoring analysts for GRC tooling or operations within our roles, so that we can develop and do that exercise initially, to where we are speaking the same nomenclature for risk. We are identifying and calling out the same risk with the same wording and the same language and attributes into however many tools we have, and then reporting on that in the same way. And that requires a tight alignment with enterprise security teams, security engineering teams, incident response teams, as well as the enterprise risk team. So the potential is there. I think that TPRM has a really great opportunity to be builders in that space, because we know the pain points probably very well in relation to what we're trying to do. But yeah, I think that we are ripe for that engineering innovation across the teams. I think a lot of TPRM security practitioners can lead the way as leaders internally with that, working with other department leaders. It would be great to see that happening faster. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, because you're very close to that space, Ayoub, and what's your forecast for that?
I won't go into like kind of woo-woo futurism or anything. But I agree with your analysis. I think you spoke about data layer and the importance of like using the same data. I think like Charles from Netflix is something that he speaks about often. It's kind of that data lake. I think one area where all of the Jersey data lives, and then depending on which team is leveraging that data, you can get it in your own format. And I think disruption in the other kind of verticals of security have happened. Like I think SOC have evolved a ton in the way they've been 10 years ago. We've seen that with AppSec as well. A lot of the different kind of areas of AppSec around SCS, SaaS, like there's a lot of involvement where like there's standardization of data in a way through which you can communicate with developers easily. I think in GRC, there's potentially a combination of two things. There's potentially some lack in terms of technical depth that makes it more complex for GRC teams to leverage technical solutions, open source solutions as well, because there's like this kind of skills gap that needs to be bridged. And also, I would say on the other side, there was up until recently, maybe the GRC automation kind of wave helped. There was less, it wasn't felt as interesting, I think, to the market. When you're speaking about GRC, boring, who cares, compliance, these people. And we speak about the old tools, clunky tools, 7-figure contracts and implementation. You need a specific dedicated admin managing a tool that everyone hates, right? So I think there's a freshen up of the space. And I think, trust engineering, a lot of other initiatives that came really helped in terms of making it like cooler, more interesting. And I think the problems that GRC solves are so much more interesting now to a lot of people, just because except the CISO is the only team that sees everything from the security perspective. And I would say TPRM is central to a lot of these processes, just because you actually assess the full security posture of hundreds of companies. This is your job, right? So you also kind of have that baseline of understanding of how to assess security quickly with the best like kind of risk to reward ratio, and understanding the cost and limitations of like, I can't spend like a year on this, but I need to get like reasonable assurance that we kind of managing the risk posture and the risk appetite, how it's been driven by leadership. So I think that's why I think it's also exciting. And I do see some tools, and I think AI as well can play a big role, just because of how much unstructured data like TPRM teams work with. I have one more question around tooling. So there's an area of tools that always felt like a bit weird that it was not marketed as TPRM, even though for me it's like the perfect TPRM tool. It's just SaaS security. So of course, I think a lot of TPRM now is managing a SaaS, just because I think probably 95+% of the onboarding of additional vendors are SaaS vendors. There's like big vendors everyone knows, right, in the space, in SaaS security space. They've been marketed more for enterprise security, corporate security. So the teams that manage the endpoints, that manage kind of the business apps. But for me, there's a big, maybe it's just a go-to-market issue and not actually like feature issue of those tools. But I think they haven't been marketed to TPRM, maybe because they manage the tool once it's inside. And I think a lot of people see TPRM as like the intake, even though you also manage the ongoing relationship with the vendors and the ongoing security posture. Do you have SaaS security tools in your company? Most likely, if you have, depending on like how good or how strong TPRM program is, you probably don't own the tool, or maybe you leverage it from another team. And how have you seen the benefits if you use one for your assessments?
So I'll jump right in because this is my jam. Coming from an enterprise security background, right? When I came over to Netflix, I was brought on really to help build out the additional layer of vendor security. They saw a need for SaaS security to expand that visibility. And so SaaS security tools, oh my goodness, I could go on and on. I won't, but I will say that I really see the value of them. And I've been able to bring, a tool, Obsidian Security is one that I absolutely adore, and I really love working with them. But I think what they have been able to give us the visibility that we didn't have before, especially like post contract. So they help us feel more secure in shifting just from that point in time review to that continuous posture management portion. They help to give us that insight to help with the remediation, the misconfigurations, the all the unknown integrations that are attached to some of these really critical vendors and their products within our ecosystem. And so, part of operationalizing those tools for us is really integrating them with like asset management. Again, like I said, surfacing those misconfigurations and tying those insights into our vendor ownership and lifecycle state. So I see massive value in them. I think they really help take TPRM into that continuous monitoring phase and in an easier way. Just by being able to bring in that tool. So obviously I'll gush about it. I really enjoy adding SaaS security into TPRM. And I think, just coming from my background, I had that unique perspective. And so when I got here, I was like, there's an opportunity here and we should use it as part of our program. And so that's been something that we've been doing and helping drive. And I can just tell you the visibility alone has really helped the program move forward and add additional value that before we didn't have. So yeah, I'll pause there because I don't want to dominate with my love for SaaS security.
No, I understand. I echo that. I come from IT background and AppSec as well. I would also piggyback on that and just say that it's really, really helpful because a lot of those UIs are used for audit evidence artifacts, right? So when TPRM has some insight and oversight, or at least view and participation into working with those tools, then there's more cohesion when there's audit discussions, I would say. And the more that we can do to speed up that, Ayoub, customer assurance side, I think it's uniformity, it's helpful, efficiencies as well.
Yeah, McKenna, I could agree with you on the SSPM. We did some of that as well. I would love to see more adoption and growth in that space. I think there's definitely more opportunity to, from like the posture side, flagging things. I think there's some opportunity in there where work down some of the false positives or tailor a little bit more to your environment or to the apps. I think there's definitely improvement there, but I'm really excited where that's going. Like you said, more of the continuous monitoring on the app, on your environment and how you guys are using it. And it gives you again, that opportunity to work cross-functioning with your security team. So for that, if you are flagging issues, working with your vulnerability management and, making sure that you're assigning a risk and, taking corrective actions to strengthen that. So I love where that's going. I hope to see more companies getting competitive and expanding their capabilities on that.
Perfect. So if SaaS security vendors are listening, we need more of this. This is a call to action. I think there's like an untapped potential. I just think sometimes it's just a marketing issue. It's just that they probably don't understand there might be an opportunity here. But that is. I always thought that I was logical. That's very great to hear that you've been leveraging those tools and you get benefits from it. Actually, we'll ask my last question, which will be more of funnier question. Okay, we're still in GRC, so fun is not really allowed. So my question is, you probably assessed hundreds, potentially between the three of you, thousands of vendors. The question I have is anything where, the vendor presented security in X way, and once you either dug deeper or, went through potentially a customer audit and, kind of went behind the scenes, the reality was completely different. So if each of you have an interesting or fun story to tell about, I don't know, kind of marketing speak versus reality, or something like this on TPRM side would be really interesting to hear.
So one of the funnier ones I've seen, and I've actually seen this quite a few times actually, which is unfortunate, but when you're doing your due diligence and you're asking, hey, can you give us a penetration test? What do you have? Application, web app, whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, we totally do that. Okay, well, send it over, and then you get it and it looks like it's some, web-based vuln scan that they just ran and, gives you all the pretty green, red, yellow, and an SLA. And you look at this, you're like, this is not a pen test. Like, this is some sort of, you just paid $50 or $100 to do a quick vuln scan, you're passing it off. And then when they double down on it and go, no, this is a pen test, you're like, okay, that's where, if you're passing me a SOC 2 or anything else at that point, I'm really concerned with the merit of what you are telling me at that point. So I have seen that quite a few times. There's always an opportunity to educate and go, okay, I can see why you would think that. This is actually what I'm looking for, hiring someone that actually tries to basically ethically break in and, whether it's a blind study or an unblind, like this is what it looks like and this is the results we would expect to see. And I think sometimes you articulate that, it does resonate, but then again, there's the cost component where they're like, oh, wait, how much does that cost? Oh, maybe we don't want to do that, or maybe we need to do it to get this deal. So I have seen that a handful of times.
Yeah, I knew one time I upon requesting a data diagram about the product, receiving an entire corporate network documentation with, unredacted device IPs and information, and immediately, we laugh about that. It's kind of a eyebrow raising moment, but in all seriousness, there is something to say about training the customer assurance team. Also, when you dig deeper and have some technical due diligence calls, having the right people on the call from both sides is, like, in all seriousness, you could be talking for days about a subject or a question or an issue you're trying to get to the bottom of. And sometimes you just need the right people on the call. And so that's one of the roles that we play as TPRM professionals, is ringing the right bells and trying to get the right stakeholders. And I think that we are project managers in a lot of aspects in that way as well. But yeah, the IP addresses on the document was, I remember seeing that and thinking, oh dear.
I was going to say, I think, Kristi, what you're basically saying, I think GitLab is super lucky to have Ayoub there, who's able to wear many hats, speak many languages, and deflect tons of questionnaires. So
yeah, that is not lost on us.
I'm sure they're excited to have you.
Great answer. Perfect. Yeah, I love that one. And I love the part, Kristi, about getting the right stakeholders. I actually remember some conversations where you have someone on the call who's an expert but also knows all the flaws. And the way they go through the conversation, they could have massaged a little bit the statements. And often there's this thing where, when you're used to working with internal stakeholders with a lot of transparency, and then you speak to external stakeholders when you need to kind of understand this is within the boundaries, this is outside, and this is, for example, going through a customer audit or something. You kind of really have to train people that have never been through an external audit. Some people are like very free to say,
yeah,
and
a lot of times you'll have, less mature companies that may be doing great. They're offering a great service. The businesses really want to buy this product. And when you pop the hood open and look underneath, the maturity is just not there, and you really want it to be there. So there is also an aspect of TPRM helping your own org make the decision: do we want to partner and uplift together and work? Do we want this to be a collaborative maturity because the industry needs it, in general, or is this too much risk for us? So I think that's something that kind of comes right after these aha moments that we have, is we have to be very quick on our feet to take those disclosed gaps, and what do we do with that?
Makes total sense. That was a great conversation. I think we hit on a lot of different points. I also really enjoyed all the insights from the trenches, from all of y'all. Yeah, I really think practitioners will benefit a ton. And I think also what I like about this conversation is, as like people are very quick to kind of speak about TPRM and stuff. And I do think that kind of understanding from the practitioner's side, like how you do in the day-to-day, the constraints, the challenges, all the different stakeholders you have to manage and please, and etc. I think also helps, humanize, because I think, people are very quick to dismiss everything's broken because of TPRM and everything is TPRM's fault. So I do salute all of you for the work you're doing, because at the end of the day, I think when you compound it, all of the work you're doing is securing everyone's supply chain. So I think the benefits compound, especially as potentially one vendor might be onboarded by hundreds of companies. So all of your kind of assessing that vendor, when it kind of compounds, it can have like a meaningful impact on their security posture, which helps everyone. So anyone has any last thoughts before we wrap up? Or
I do like that you just humanized us and our role, because it's very timely, as the TPRM function is automated more and more, along with every other function, it seems, in the business. It does serve us well to remind and circle back to the reality that there's always a human in the loop. That's always beneficial, because we may not be functioning as the same type of human in the process, but we have an important role to play in the due diligence process, whether it's verifying after the trust is there, or some other advisory function that has to be QA'd. And I think that it's really going to be interesting to see how the humans of TPRM continue to thrive and to add value.
thanks a lot. That was a great conversation. Thanks, Joel, for joining me. And yeah, hope to see you crushing TPRM at all your companies. That's the plan. Take
Well,
care.
thanks for having us and bringing awareness. So
Thank
appreciate what
you.
you're doing for the space as well.
No worries. We appreciate it. Take care.